Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Today I'm going to show you how to make an upside down cuff bracelet, which is just what it sounds like. A standard cuff bracelet has some kind of design on top that goes on the back of your wrist and with an opening on the bottom to slide over your wrist sideways. What we're going to do is we're going to put the opening on the top and set a stone next to it and make some kind of designs around it. I spent a little while sorting through, actually about 2 hours looking at different stones trying to figure out which one to use. I'm not sure if I chose the right one, but it's kind of an interesting piece of Ocean Jasper that's sort of it's not an equilateral rounded triangle, but it's 30 by 35 millimeters, so it's a pretty good sized stone. I think it's going to be kind of a modern looking piece, so we'll see how it turns out. Before we do that, I need to thank some groups of people. The first group are my patrons over on Patreon, and they are my core group of supporters. I have two new ones. I have Jacqueline B. Thank you for signing up. I also have Sally. I appreciate the support of both of you, and I think you'll find that it's a really great group of people over there that you can kind of online mingle with and share ideas and strategies and resources. So thanks also to my previous patrons. I couldn't do this without you. The other group are my YouTube subscribers. We just passed 25,200, which is amazing. Thank you for that. Thank you also for the lovely comments that a lot of you leave. I appreciate the input, suggestions, constructive criticism, and the nice stories you tell me about ways that you've enjoyed my videos or you've learned something new or whatever. That kind of really makes it feel like I'm doing something good, so thanks for that. Thank you also for the financial support, the Buy Me a Coffees, the super thanks, merch purchases, my ebooks. All of that stuff makes my channel sustainable, and I couldn't do it without your help, so thank you for that. All right, well, let's make an upside down cuff bracelet. So this is one of my design idea sketchbooks that are available on my merch store. There's a whole bunch of different models. This one has a gauged inches to millimeters chart that I find pretty useful. The big feature on these for me is the dot matrix in the background on the pages. It makes it so I can draw a lot more symmetrical drawings. So if you're like me, that might be useful to you. So get yourself one or two of these. They're really handy. And it's a nice way to keep track of your projects so you can go back and revisit and remember how you did things. At least that's an issue for me. Okay, so this is what I was thinking. I've been thinking about kind of this shape, so I was looking for things that were sort of triangular, and I was looking through. Here's a bunch of the stones that I was considering. Let's see that or not, but nothing quite jumped out at me. I thought this would be too busy. This was where I was originally going. Maybe that's sodalite. I have some really big, pretty sort of triangular druzy quartzes that are dark like this one, but they're just so big, and they were a little bit too big for what I was doing here. And most of these are, I'm not sure how that rectangle got in there. That one. These ones are all sort of shaped in the general way that I wanted them to be. But I ended up picking this one, even though it's a little bit on the subdued side. It's got kind of olive greens and kind of a forest green in the background, but it appears to be Ocean Jasper, and it's 35 by 30 millimeters. So I'm going to make a bezel for that. We'll use 26 gauge fine silver bezel that's 3/16 inch tall. That's 4.76 millimeters by 0.41 millimeters, I believe. For the bottom of that, I think I'm going to use 26, and I'm actually going to mount that on top of a piece of 22 gauge that's going to make up this segment that goes underneath it right here. I thought about soldering it right on there and just making the whole thing out of 22, but I think it'll be easier to do it. I'm also probably going to curve the bottom of this bezel just slightly to make it match a curve on that I want to have on the bracelet. So we'll have to kind of curve the bottom before we solder it all together. This is going to be attached. This is 12 gauge square that was started out as 2 millimeters, and I flattened it out in the rolling mill a little bit. It's it's about that wide that way and about half as wide the other way, so it's probably close to a millimeter, maybe a little bit more. And that's going to be our border here. This is going to be open space right here. And then I have some low dome number 2, I think it is. Low dome number 2. Where is that? Low dome number 4 is what the band is going to be made out of. It looks like this there. That's a good size for a bracelet band. I need to attach that somehow securely to this flattened square wire, so we'll kind of merge those together. In my mind anyway, we're going to do that. I wanted it to flare out into kind of a shape that matches, and so I found some low dome number 4, or number 2, which is like almost 13 millimeters wide, and I flattened it out and flared it with a hammer a little bit just to see if I could do that. And then what I'll do is I'll cut this probably with a saw, more of a tapered shape, and we'll solder that to that band we're going to make out of the number 4. So, and I think that's pretty much all of it. I'm probably going to texture this just with a diamond burr to kind of rough it up to make it stand out against the non-sheet here. And we'll leave this real shiny over here as a contrast too. So I think it'll be fun. The big issues I'm worried about are connecting this to this securely. So I'm going to do some, I might have to think about it, but I'm going to do something there to make that a little sturdier. This I'm probably going to mount on top of a piece of sheet that sticks out a little bit so that I have a two-surface solder joint rather than just butt joint. And I think that'll work out okay. So let's get started on the bezel for this stone. I'm going to move these other stones out of the way. I just ordered some more supplies from Rio, where I get most of my silver. And oh my gosh. Every time I order silver, I kind of have a yikes moment anymore. Okay, we're not going to put the end of this bezel on one of the corners. That's never a good idea. It always causes problems. From my experience, anyway. Let's try to be careful around sharp corners on stones. I'm always afraid I'm going to break a corner off or something. And after all the time I spent trying to figure out which stone to use for this one, I don't want to do that again. Oh, here's my setup right here. I used to always say it in every video, but it was time-consuming and made you listen to me drone on about my torch and my solder and stuff like that. So. All right. Usually make these into kind of a quadrilateral shape. Typically a rectangle or a square. Doesn't have to be perfect though, it's just easier to get a nice solder joint if you do that, from my perspective. Okay, cut myself a little bit of solder. Okay, let's dry our flux. Where's my tweezers? There you are. Let's get that a little bit. I haven't been that far off in a long time. Let's try that again. Okay, that looks alright. Let's find some 26 gauge. Let's see if we got a big enough piece here. Maybe. I get it off of there, I think. That'll work. I give this just a little file on this side now. Make sure everything's sitting flat. Oh, you know what? I almost forgot. We're going to curve this a little bit. So really, since it's going to be this way, and the back of the wrist is relatively flat, so I don't need it to be hugely curved, but just a slight curve I think will be nice. So let's put it in the middle here. Middle here. I'm just going to taper it down. So we'll just kind of curve that just slightly. So let's go do that real quick. This is going to get a little bit hot, so I put a little glove on. Usually start in the middle. Just using a white abrasive silicone wheel. And just taper it down right down to the corner. Oopsie. I think that looks good, so I'm going to use the bracelet mandrel to kind of curve the sheet a little bit, and you can see that this curve, hopefully that's within frame, you can see this doesn't need to be near that sharp of a curve, but if we bend it like that and then bend it backwards, it should fit nicely against the stone, or against the bottom of the bezel, I should say. That's pretty close. So hopefully everything will kind of stay in place. Let's get that soldered on there. We've cut quite a bit of solder. It's a big bezel. Might stick something under there just so it's less likely to slump. I don't want to have a slumpy sheet. Embarrassing. So with this big of a bezel, you're going to be pretty generous with solder. I know a lot of people like to scatter 30 little tiny pieces around the edges, but I'm more of a... Nobody's going to see the inside of this anyway, so if it's a little sloppy, nobody cares. Kind of guy. I'm just making sure these are touching the side and the bottom. I'm going to heat mostly on the base. And there's quite a bit of surface area inside of the bezel. So when you're trying to solder a big bezel together like this with thin sheet on the bottom, or with thick sheet, it's even harder. You got to keep in mind that the bezel is sort of exposed up top and the sheet is less easy to get up to the soldering temperature because it's down below. So a lot of times people will melt their bezel before they ever get it soldered down to the sheet. Much to their chagrin. I don't think I have any gaps. No embarrassing gaps tonight. Let's cool it off and see. Okay, I'm just going to trim off the excess. You don't have to use shears to do that. You can, if you're one of those sorts who likes to saw things, do that as well. Not that there's anything wrong with those sorts. Almost every time I do something that has a little bit of a curve to the bottom of the bezel, someone usually asks me about the stone rocking, and generally when you're setting a closed back stone like this anyway, you might have some kind of backing behind it. And I use uncorrugated cardboard, like tag board. Like this, like the kind of thing you find on the backs of legal pads. Works pretty well for that. And so we'll be padding areas to prevent it from rocking the stone just a little bit like that. But that's very last. At the very end. Okay, stage 1 done. We got that. Now I think let's make the frame for this out of a 10 gauge or 12 gauge square that I flattened out. So I think I'm gonna let's cut the back piece here. Or should we make it all out of one? Let's make it all out of one. Let's do this. It'll be sturdier if we don't piece it together in 3 pieces. I'm just trying to get a gauge of how much of this I need. Let's measure that. Oh, 63-ish. So let's find the center of this. In theory, it should be about there. So we'll kind of keep that in mind when we're figuring out where the center of this is going to go. That's about right. So let's bend from there. I wasn't too far off from where I had my marks, but it needs to be a little bit further in than that. Just a tiny bit, I think. So I think what I'll do then is I'll file a notch part of the way through, right at those 2 spots, and then we'll be able to bend them inwards and get a kind of a tighter bend there. Just going about halfway through on these ones. That's starting to look pretty good. I think I'm going to solder those closed so you can't move them anymore. I'm going to make that bend permanent. I'm going to do something called pick soldering, where I pick up a little bit of solder on the end of my pick. It's a really useful skill to learn if you haven't picked that one up, no pun intended. If you haven't picked that up, here's a video about it. I think it's one of those skills that level you up. Paradigm changing skill. What's the term I'm looking for? At this point, I want it to match closely around here. I don't care too much about this part right now. In fact, I'm going to move those out of the way, sort of, by holding it right here, putting it out so they don't bump into each other anymore. Okay, well I think that's pretty close, at least up to at this point up here. So I'm going to cut a piece of 22 gauge sheet, if I can find it with that. But it needs to go kind of along there. I guess I need to decide how far down I want it to go here. I think I prefer, this side's a little bit further down, so I'm going to figure out how far down that is. Do like 20 millimeters. A piece about that big, like that. It's just about wide enough. So let's just cut that piece off. One thing you need to do when you're going from a drawing like this is remember that your drawing may not be perfect, which I was just thinking about, because when I line it up along the lines, it looks alright on paper, but when I look at here, it doesn't look, it looks wonky to me. So something else I'm going to do is, because I don't want a lot of mess on the inside where the bezel is going to go, in that gap between there, right here, because I want it to be really consistently sterling-y looking, and solder has a slightly different color to it. So in order to not have to do all sorts of cleaning up in there, I'm going to try and do all of the solder on the outside edge so that very little of it flows inward. So we'll do it that way. That usually works pretty well. Might put a little bit of sheet on the bottom down here. Well, maybe I don't need to. I probably don't need to. These aren't straight enough to be a where they tip it like this. One thing you can use the flux for sometimes, when it goes through that sticky stage and you're placing your solder, it kind of glues your solder in place so it doesn't slide around. When it's in the cooler stage, it gets all glassy and slick. So if you can kind of keep it at that gluey stage, it makes it easier to get your solder to stay where you want it to stay. It's truly amazing after all these videos I haven't lit my microphone on fire. I'm going to trim off the excess on the outside here and file it flush. Again, you can do that with your saw if you want. I'm just going to do the inside curve here with my saw probably. I'm going to kind of match the curve, so let's see if I can bend a piece to use as a template there to trace along. I don't suppose it has to be perfect. That's pretty close. That looks pretty good, so let's go saw that little bit out. That looks alright. I'm going to just gently bend this, not very much. I'm probably going to have to elevate it since I made it not flat anymore, but one way to get some solder where we need it to be is to sweat solder it, and that's where you pre-melt some solder on the back of this. Then we'll place them how we want them to be after we get everything all fluxed, and we should be able to just reheat it till it flows again. So I'm thinking maybe I'll use this thing. It's a magnesia block. So a softer surface, so I can just kind of set this off to the edge maybe and control that curve a little bit. That way. Let me find a little bit of wire or something. It may, when this bubbles as I'm drying the flux, it may move it a little bit, so I may need to steer it around. This is always the hardest part for me, is getting things lined up straight. You know where to put the heat when you're doing something like this is where most of the mass is, and that in this case is that sheet and that wire on the bottom versus this bezel, which has a lot less mass. And so it's going to take less time for that to get up to the soldering temperature. But a lot of times people will get the top part up to the soldering temperature, but the thing that they're soldering to underneath doesn't reach the temperature it needs to be for it to really solder. So we're going to need to figure out about how much of this wire we need. And so I'm going to pre-shape it into kind of bracelet shape. If there is such a thing, bracelet shape. To get an idea about how long of a piece to cut. I don't think it's going to be as long, or need to be as long as I think it's going to need to be. I want this to kind of come down like that. I'm going to go a little bit shy of where they come all the way to the top and still have a pretty big wrist size. That way I can size it down if I need to when I get to that stage. Okay, I think first I'm going to try and flatten this out and round it. Or should I make it come to a point? Maybe I should make it come to a point to kind of match the stone. Kind of like that, sticking inwards. If that's the case, then we just need to kind of straighten these part out a little bit. Like that. I think I'll do that. I'm going to smooth out that point just a little bit with the Dremel. I'll be right back. So I got everything kind of lined up, I think, and I'm going to go ahead and solder this. I'm going to pick solder it. We'll flux that there. And if you're new to this, one of the things about silver is you got to heat the entire piece to really get it to solder well and bring it all up to that temperature. So this is pretty stretched out. So I'm going to turn my flame up pretty high. See, that wasn't even hot enough to get it to flow, so I just left a little ball of solder there. And when it starts to flow, I know that this next one is about there too, so I can just move it in there and finish it like that. Bent it around this way and then kind of determine that's about how far it should be. So I'm going to cut it off right here, file that flat, and then I'll get it ready to solder these together. Okay, with the exception of, I'm going to take the saw, I'm going to taper this out to the flared end here like this. We're just going to pickle, and then when I come back after I polish it, we'll set the stone. So, okay, a few things to note. I did use a diamond burr to just kind of rough up that inside area, and then got everything all polished up as well. And then I put a little bit of tag board in here, like I said. There's a little more at the end and a little bit at the back side here too, and then a single layer that goes all the way across. And I do this differently than some. I use my chain nose pliers as a bezel pusher. And one thing I do sometimes before I set a stone with a big triangle kind of shape is the sharp corners sometimes. When you go to push them in, there's too much metal and you're trying to compress too much metal into a small space. So I'll thin those out just a tiny bit at the top. Just to reduce the volume of metal there. You gotta be careful though, because by the time you polished and everything, oftentimes it's already a little thin. Okay. So I'm going to hold down with some pressure here. And then I'm going to go directly on each corner and bend it over. And go back to the sides. So you have it laid down, then we're going to use the rounded outer part as a burnishing tool. And that's where you just rub that top edge really hard. And then clean it up. Okay, so that's kind of what I was shooting for. Might have to do a little bit more shaping just to get it how I want it exactly. But I think overall that's kind of what I wanted. Kind of a cool bracelet. So let me know what you think. Let me know what you would do different. I'd love to hear your opinion on the piece. What's your favorite stone? I like Ocean Jasper a lot. This one's a very subtle one, but I do like it. So I'll get some better pictures and put them at the end. Okay, well that was an upside down cuff bracelet. I hope you enjoyed that and got something out of it. If you did, make sure to hit the like button before you go. And I'd love it if you'd take a moment and check out my main channel page on YouTube. I have 560 some videos now. I do 3 a week, one on Tuesdays, one on Thursdays, and one on Saturday. So there's quite a bit of content there. A whole lot of project ideas, lots of skills at different levels. So whether you're a beginner, intermediate, advanced metalsmith, you'll either find some good skills you can use, or you'll find lots of projects that you can try. So check those out. I'd love it if you'd subscribe to my channel. There's no cost to that, so it'll allow you to hit the bell button so you can know when I release a new video. And don't forget to also hit the video description down below. There's information about this video as well as some important links. There's a link to my Patreon if you want to find out more about that community. There's multiple tiers of membership with different privileges, the lowest being just getting rid of the YouTube advertising. The other ones include some live streams, Patreon videos that are only for Patreon, also voting privileges on upcoming projects. So I'd love it if you'd join us over there on that community as well. There's a link to my merch store if you want to get yourself one of those nice design idea sketchbooks or any of the other variety of merch that I have over there. There's magnets, t-shirts, mugs, and my ebooks as well. And right now is a great time to hit the merch store, honestly, because through the through December 5th, we're continuing on with our Black Friday, Small Business Saturday, Cyber Monday sale. We've kind of stretched it out over a longer period to meet people's needs for shopping. Everything over there is 20% off right now. And if you go to my actual website, there's also some different merch there and the ebooks. And those will also be 20% off. And the discounts are applied automatically, so when you check out. So get yourself something. You deserve it, and you can also get that burgeoning metalsmith in your life a special treat. So, all right, well, thanks for watching today. Take care. Happy silversmithing.